My name is Claire Bennett, and I am 34 years old. At midnight, I drove 180 miles through a flood and found Mom outside a closed motel, soaked to the skin, clutching a grocery bag that held everything my brother had allowed her to take from her own house. He and his wife had emptied her savings, changed the locks, and left her beside an office with plywood over the windows, while emergency sirens warned everyone else to get indoors. 6 hours later, police lights washed across Mom's porch. My brother came through the door barefoot, furious, acting like the house belonged to him. His wife stood behind him, recording their version of the story. "What did you do?" he screamed. My hands were shaking, but I kept my voice level. "I ended the part where Mom's silence protected you." He stopped shouting when an officer stepped aside. Mom wore my dry coat. A bruise circled her wrist. In one hand, she held the key that no longer opened her door. In the other, she held a document bearing a signature she had never written. By sunrise, the last pending transfer had been frozen, but the money already gone was only the first layer. What we found inside that house would cost my brother his career, his freedom, and the family name he had used as a shield. Before I tell you what he said next, and what happened when Mom finally walked back through her own front door, tell me, what time is it where you are, and where are you watching from? I want to see how far a story about breaking family silence can travel. 6 hours earlier, my phone vibrated across the kitchen counter. 3 counties were under flash flood warnings, sections of interstate were closed, and rescue crews were asking people to stay home. I almost ignored the unknown number. Then I answered and heard Mom say my name as if someone might take the phone away. "Claire, I'm at a motel. I don't think it's open." Rain hammered the shelter above her. Her teeth clicked between words. Her house key did not work, and the pharmacy had declined her card. A man in the background demanded his phone back. The call ended. For almost a year, my older brother, Derek, had answered every question about Mom with the same sentence: "I've got it handled." He and his wife moved in after her knee replacement, supposedly for 6 weeks. 6 weeks became 11 months. I lived 180 miles away and let convenience disguise itself as trust. I had view-only access to Mom's primary account, but checked it only with each quarterly statement. 3 weeks earlier, the alert stopped after someone switched delivery from email to paper. Derek blamed a bank update, and I accepted the answer. I called Mom back. The borrowed phone went straight to voicemail. I called Derek. No answer. I called the motel number she had managed to give me. A recording said the Pine Hollow Motor Lodge was temporarily closed after floodwater damaged its electrical system. That was when worry became something colder. I packed boots, blankets, water, a flashlight, dry clothes, and Mom's medical folder. At 12:18 a.m., I left. Within 20 miles, the navigation estimate disappeared beneath road closure symbols. The interstate carried me through the first hour, but rain erased the lane markings and tractor-trailers threw walls of water over my windshield. Each time the wipers crossed, a different memory appeared. Mom calling in May to ask why her electric bill had doubled, then laughing when Derek took the phone and said she had confused 2 statements. Mom whispering in July that her checkbook had gone missing. Derek texting 10 minutes later. "She found it in the freezer. Please don't upset her." Mom asking in September whether I remembered the green folder Dad kept in the study. I had changed the subject because I was late for a meeting. Those memories did not arrive in order. They struck like debris carried by the flood, each one small enough to dismiss when it happened, heavy enough to break something when they hit together. I had not abandoned Mom in one dramatic decision. I had done it in 20 reasonable choices. At 1:37 a.m., a state trooper blocked the interstate entrance ahead and directed traffic toward a county road along higher ground. I pulled into a gas station under emergency lights and tried Derek again. This time he answered immediately. "Where is she?" I asked. He exhaled slowly, performing patience. "Claire, don't panic." Mom got confused and wandered off. We booked her a room because she was agitated, but she refused to go inside. "The motel is closed." Silence lasted half a second too long. Then she gave you the wrong name. That proves what I'm saying. Why doesn't her key work? We replaced a broken lock, I told her. His voice softened. You shouldn't be driving in this. Turn around. Vanessa and I are looking for her. That was the first time he said his wife's name, Vanessa, as if adding another witness made the lie safer. I heard a television behind him and the hollow clink of ice in a glass. He was not searching. He was sitting in Mom's living room. I saved his message and opened the banking app. Mom's savings had held $247,318. Now it showed $1,904. 3 transfers were complete. A fourth, for $61,400, would process when the bank opened. All led to VDL Home Solutions. I wanted to call Derek and demand an explanation. Instead, I photographed the transactions and called the bank. The representative could not discuss the account without Mom, but she created a case and alerted the Elder Abuse Unit. It was not a freeze, only a timestamp, but it placed something between Derek and the next dollar. Near an underpass, brown water crossed the asphalt. The car ahead entered, stalled, and drifted sideways. I stopped, but water reached my front tires before traffic behind me reacted. My steering wheel jerked. The car felt weightless. I reversed until my tires caught gravel. A volunteer firefighter guided us toward a farm road above the creek. I followed the ridge detour, adding 42 minutes while the dashboard clock kept moving. At 2:46, Derek texted, "Mom is safe. Police notified. Go home." He wanted a record of concern, and me gone before the transfer cleared. I kept driving, aware that the worst damage had happened quietly inside a house where I accepted, "I've got it handled." I reached Pine Hollow at 3:31 a.m. The sign was dark, the driveway covered by runoff, and closure tape snapped between posts. I drove past once, seeing only empty spaces and plywood. Then my headlights crossed a shape beneath the office awning. It looked like luggage until one hand lifted against the glare. I parked crooked and ran across the lot with a blanket. Up close, I recognized Mom's rain-dark shoes, the blue cardigan I had given her, and the grocery bag clutched to her chest. She had wedged herself between an ice machine and the wall to escape the wind. I stopped 3 feet from her. Part of me had prepared to find a confused woman who wandered away. Derek's explanation survived because the alternative was uglier. Then Mom looked up. Shame reached her face before relief did. "I'm sorry," she said. "I know you have work in the morning." That apology broke through every useful thought. I wrapped her in the blanket and touched her frighteningly cold face. She tried to smile as if she were merely late for lunch. "You didn't have to come all this way," she whispered. "Yes," I said. "I did." When I helped her stand, she guarded her left arm. A purple band was forming above her wrist. I wanted to call Derek and use every cruel word I knew. Instead, I got her into the car, removed her wet cardigan, added dry blankets, and called 911. I reported finding a 68-year-old woman outside a condemned motel during a flood emergency. While paramedics navigated the detour, I opened the bag. It held a nightgown, 2 pill bottles, a toothbrush, soup, and a rain-bent envelope. There was no wallet, phone, or coat. The envelope contained a bank address change notice, a deed copy, and a home equity application. Mom's real signature leaned forward as if in a hurry. The one on the deed stood perfectly upright. I did not show her the banking screen. I asked only what happened. Mom stared at the dashboard. "They said I was spending too much. They took my cards so I wouldn't lose them." I waited. "Yesterday I asked for the green folder. Your father kept the house papers in it. Derek got angry." She rubbed the blanket between her fingers. "Vanessa said I had promised them the house because they were taking care of me. I said I had promised no such thing." Derek held my arm. "Not hard," he said. "Just enough to make me listen." Her instinct to defend him landed harder than an accusation. "They drove me here after dinner. Vanessa said the room was paid for. Derek took my key because he said I wouldn't need it." Mom swallowed. "Nobody was in the office. I thought I had misunderstood." The receipt's reservation number belonged to a property 70 miles north. Derek had given her useless paper so she would doubt herself instead of him. "Why didn't you call me sooner?" I asked, and regretted the question as soon as I saw her face. "He said you were tired of cleaning up my mistakes. He said you asked him to handle me." I had never said that. But I had said I was swamped and thanked him for handling things. He built his lie out of bricks I had handed him. The ambulance arrived at 3:56. Paramedics treated Mom for mild hypothermia and examined her wrist. As they moved her onto a stretcher, she caught my sleeve. "Please don't make this a family war," she said. "Maybe if they give the money back, we can keep it private." I looked at the closed motel, the useless receipt, and the wet grocery bag containing a 68-year-old woman's reduced life. How much harm can we call a family matter before our silence becomes part of the crime? I squeezed her hand. "I won't make it a war, Mom. I'm going to make it a record." At 4:08 a.m., beside Mom's hospital stretcher, I called Ruth Keller, my parents' estate attorney, whose card was in the medical folder. I expected voicemail. She answered on the fourth ring, fully alert. I sent photographs and read the transfer amounts. Ruth promised no arrest, court order, or miracle. She asked whether Mom was alert, understood the transfers, had authorized a deed, and faced further loss before business hours. With warm packs around her, Mom answered clearly. She had authorized nothing. She wanted Derek and Vanessa removed from every account and wanted me to act. Ruth said, "3 years ago, your mother signed an immediately effective durable financial power of attorney naming you as her agent. I keep the original in my fire file. Derek is not named anywhere. I also have a bank-specific certification your mother completed when she added you as emergency backup after surgery." I had signed an acknowledgement and forgotten it existed. Now that distant paperwork became the bridge between suspicion and action. Ruth sent the executed documents, Mom's identification, her signed declaration, and my screenshots to the bank's 24-hour fraud desk. The bank could place a temporary administrative hold without a judge if it verified the account holder or lawful agent and found credible fraud evidence. A court order would be needed later for longer restraints or money already elsewhere. "The completed wires are harder," Ruth warned. "The receiving bank can refuse a recall and money can be moved again. But the $61,400 is still pending. If it enters the morning batch, we may lose the cleanest recovery. We have perhaps 90 minutes." The hospital room became a clock. At 4:27, an analyst requested live verification. The storm dropped the call. At 4:41, Derek tried to log in. The bank locked online access, but the transfer remained pending. Ruth alerted both receiving banks. At 5:03, she electronically filed an emergency petition against any further transfer of Mom's property. Ruth knew the county's after-hours procedure from earlier elder abuse cases. She called the duty clerk, not a friendly judge, and submitted sworn evidence for on-call review. The judge might wait until court opened. The bank's early hold and the later judicial order were separate tools. That distinction made the speed real. At 5:10, I imagined Derek destroying the green folder or moving the completed funds. My thumb hovered over his name. One call might persuade him to reverse everything or warn him exactly what we knew. I put the phone face down. Wanting peace did not make that choice safe. The hardest part was not anger. Anger gave me direction. The hardest part was recognizing that every legal step narrowed the path back to the family we had pretended to be. If I signed as Mom's agent, called police, and supported Ruth's petition, Derek might never forgive me. Mom might blame me when the shock wore off. I might spend years wondering whether a private confrontation could have saved everyone. Then I looked through the treatment room glass and saw Mom apologizing to a nurse for needing a blanket. Derek had trained her to treat her own survival as an inconvenience. That ended my hesitation. At 5:18, Ruth requested a welfare response at Mom's house, reporting suspected exploitation, forced removal, the bruise, abandonment during an emergency, and risk to evidence. She reminded me that officers were not debt collectors. Without consent, a warrant, or an emergency, they could not search drawers. They could secure safety, take statements, and preserve what was visible. At 5:31, the bank analyst called again. Mom repeated her identity, described the unauthorized activity, and revoked any permission Derek might claim. I spoke as her agent under the power of attorney. Ruth remained on the line and certified the documents. Then we waited. The nurse brought dry scrubs and discharge papers. Mom asked whether Derek would go to jail and whether Vanessa would hate her. I said I did not know. When she asked whether I hated them, my answer would not come. At 5:47, the bank placed the temporary hold. The $61,400 stopped 14 minutes before release. Completed transfers were flagged for recall, and receiving accounts restricted during review. The money was not safely back, but the door had closed before the last thief made it through. At 5:55, the first patrol car turned onto Mom's street. At 5:58, the second arrived. Sunrise was still a thin gray line behind the storm when I helped Mom into my car. Ruth stayed on speakerphone. "Claire," she said, "your job is not to win an argument. Your job is to keep your mother safe. Say only what you can prove, and let the record grow." I drove toward the house where I had spent 18 years learning that family problems should remain behind closed doors. This time, the doors were already open, and police lights were moving across the walls. Derek came onto the porch before I had fully parked. He wore sweatpants and no shoes, and rage had stripped away the gentle voice he used on the phone. "What did you do?" he screamed. My hands shook. I remembered him teaching me to ride a bicycle, running beside me until I stopped looking back. Loving memories do not disappear when someone becomes dangerous. They make danger harder to name. I stepped out. I ended the part where Mom's silence protected you. Vanessa appeared in Mom's cream robe recording. "We cared for that woman while Claire visited twice a year," she said, her voice breaking for the camera. "Now she treats us like criminals." An officer moved between Derek and the driveway. When Mom stepped out in my coat, Derek's expression changed. He had not expected her back before he prepared her version. "Mom," he said, instantly softer. "Thank God. We've been terrified. You walked away from the motel before we could check you in." Mom held up the useless receipt. "The place was closed. There was a flood evacuation. We couldn't control that." Derek looked at the officer. "She's been confused lately. We were arranging temporary care because she isn't safe alone." Vanessa came down one step with both palms open. "Come inside, Mom. You're freezing. Let's stop this spectacle." She reached for Mom's elbow, the same arm with the bruise. I caught her wrist before she touched her. Vanessa gasped, Derek surged, and both officers reacted. For 2 seconds, I felt the pulse beneath my fingers and wanted her to be afraid. That frightened me almost as much as she did. "Claire." Ruth's voice came through my phone on the car roof. "Let go. Now." I opened my hand and stepped back. My voice cracked when I said, "Do not touch her again. You let us handle physical contact. Understood?" the officer said. "Understood." Revenge did not permit recklessness. Derek needed me emotional and easy to discredit. I forced my hands to my sides. He seized the opening. "She abandoned Mom for years. Vanessa and I gave up everything to provide care. Then show them the care expenses," I said. "I don't answer to you." His jaw tightened. "Mom agreed to compensate us." "For what?" I asked. "The $48,000 paid to your credit cards? The dealership transfer? Or VDL Home Solutions, the company registered to Vanessa's post office box?" Vanessa's phone lowered by an inch. That was the first detail they had not expected me to know. Derek turned toward Mom. "Tell them. You said the house should stay with family. You said we deserve security after everything we did." Mom's shoulders curved inward. Her old reflex was to quiet the loudest person and absorb the blame. Derek saw it and moved closer. "Mom, Claire is trying to put your son in prison. Is that what you want? After Dad died, who was here? Who took you to physical therapy? Who cooked for you?" He had done those things. Care and exploitation occupied the same house. He drove her to appointments, then rerouted her alerts, cooked dinner, then placed forged papers beside her plate. His good acts were access, not innocence. Mom looked at him for a long time. "You took me to therapy 6 times," she said. "Claire paid the bills. Vanessa brought food until she started using my card. I was grateful. I was not for sale." Vanessa began to cry. "We were drowning. Derek's commissions disappeared. My medical bills were piling up. And you had money sitting there. We were going to replace it after the house loan closed." Derek spun toward her. "Stop talking." The officer's body camera faced them. Vanessa seemed to remember it too late. "House loan?" the officer asked. Derek recovered quickly. "Private family planning. No crime." Mom handed the second officer the deed copy. "That is not my signature." Then she showed him her wrist. "My son held me here when I asked for my papers. His wife packed the bag. They drove me away and took my key." Officers separated them and read their rights. Derek requested a lawyer. Vanessa kept talking, first claiming consent, then blaming every document on Derek. Their stories moved apart in real time. Mom consented to entry into her common living areas, not a search of the couple's private bedroom. The distinction slowed us down. A clean case would last longer than a dramatic shortcut. Inside, a locksmith's invoice lay beside Mom's opened mail. An overflowing shredder was visible through a doorway. An officer stopped me from touching it, photographed the scene, and called a financial crimes detective for a warrant. Vanessa rushed toward a laptop open to online banking, but an officer blocked her. No one searched it yet. The scene was secured for the detective. Derek stood in the rain beside the porch, trying a different strategy. "Claire, please, send the police away. We'll reverse the transfer. We'll move out. Mom never has to know the details. She already knows enough. You think this makes you a hero? You left." I stayed. My throat closed. I had left and ignored signs because distance protected me from inconvenience. For one breath, guilt made his crime sound like my debt. Then Mom spoke from the doorway. She came back. "You threw me out." Derek looked at her as if betrayal belonged only to him. At 6:42, Mom's statement, the motel closure, Derek's contradictory call, and the bruise supported his arrest on suspicion of domestic assault and reckless endangerment. Financial charges required records and warrants. That morning, police acted on the harm they could document. As an officer placed him in the patrol car, Derek stared through the wet window at Vanessa. She did not step closer. She was already on her phone calling her own attorney. After a 9:30 video hearing, the judge barred Derek and Vanessa from transferring or removing Mom's property and prohibited contact. The next afternoon, a separate warrant allowed detectives to seize devices, shredder contents, and financial records. When the house was finally quiet, Mom placed the useless key on the kitchen table. The locksmith arrived and restored a lock that opened for her. She crossed the threshold slowly, then gripped the back of a chair when she saw Dad's green folder cut open on the floor. She did not cry. She looked at me and said, "I kept asking myself what I had done to make him this desperate." "Nothing," I said. "His desperation explains the pressure. It does not excuse the choice." That morning forced me to face a question I had avoided for years. When family calls consequences cruelty, are we protecting love or protecting the person who benefits from our fear? The answer did not arrive in one satisfying explosion. It arrived through statements, subpoenas, hearings, and evidence bags. Revenge in real life rarely looks like a perfect speech. It looks like patience strong enough to survive paperwork. During the first 3 days, the banks traced the money. The pending $61,400 never left, and $112,000 still in the VDL account was returned after review. The rest had paid Derek's cards, a luxury SUV down payment, taxes, electronics, and cash withdrawals. Money already spent could not simply be reversed, so Ruth added it to the civil claim. The deeper damage emerged in stages. The deed had been remotely notarized with a forged identification image and created on Vanessa's laptop. A deleted video showed Derek hiding the pages while Mom signed. In the audio, she asked whether it was a pharmacy form. He said yes. He used the false deed to seek a $140,000 home equity line. A title mismatch delayed funding. If Mom remained outside until morning, Derek planned to correct the application at opening. The flood had not caused his crime. It gave him a deadline. 2 weeks after the arrest, prosecutors added charges alleging financial exploitation of an older adult, forgery, identity fraud, conspiracy, and attempted fraudulent encumbrance of real property. Vanessa was charged as a participant, not a bystander. Her messages to Derek were direct. Put her somewhere for 1 week. Once the loan clears, Claire can complain all she wants. Another read. Use the rain. Say she wandered. Her tears on the porch had not been shame. They had been strategy failing in public. The court voided the false filing and confirmed Mom's title. Derek and Vanessa had sold their own home before moving in rent-free, so the protective order left them borrowing motel money, then renting above an auto parts store. The SUV was repossessed because its down payment was disputed proceeds. An evidence photo showed Derek watching it leave, while Vanessa stood beside plastic bins, their performed life collapsing into one curbside image. Derek was a senior loan officer who used his job knowledge to structure transfers and make the forged deed look routine. His employer's audit found he had used a vendor system to create a false income letter. He was suspended, terminated for violating financial integrity rules, removed from the company site, and reported to regulators. He later surrendered his lending license. The career that taught him to hide the theft helped prove his intent. At the preliminary hearing, Ruth displayed Vanessa's message about using the rain. Her mother read it, stood during recess, and walked past without speaking. Her sister later gave detectives a group chat in which Vanessa bragged they would own Mom's house before Christmas. Friends deleted fundraisers for her defense. I leaked nothing and contacted no one. Public records and her words did the work. Humiliation produced by evidence is harder to escape. The civil case sought unrecovered principal, interest, fees, repair costs, and permitted damages. Derek's attorney called it ruinous. Ruth said ruin was not the measure, restitution was. We were pricing the suffering they had transferred to Mom. In month 2, mediation failed when Derek still called the theft caregiving compensation. Mom asked, "What was the hourly rate for leaving me in the rain?" He had no answer. She ended the session. By month 4, a forensic accountant separated recovered funds from actual loss. With interest, medical and property costs, and fees, their exposure exceeded $300,000. Precision made the number more devastating than exaggeration. 8 months after the flood, Derek pleaded guilty to felony exploitation and forgery rather than face the video at trial. The judge imposed a 3-year sentence, with 18 months to be served in state custody and the remainder under intensive supervision, plus restitution and a prohibition on managing another person's finances. His felony record and surrendered license ended any realistic return to banking. Vanessa pleaded guilty to conspiracy and attempted financial exploitation. She received 9 months in county custody, 5 years of probation, mandatory community service unrelated to vulnerable adults, and joint responsibility for restitution. The court entered a civil judgment for the remaining loss, interest, and fees, allowing future wage garnishment and liens against non-exempt property. They would not repay everything quickly. That was part of the consequence. The debt would meet them again at every raise, refund, and asset they tried to build. At sentencing, Derek turned toward Mom and said he had only wanted stability. The prosecutor played 20 seconds of the motel call. Rain pounding metal, Mom asking a stranger if she could borrow his phone, her voice shaking when she said my name. Derek looked down before the recording ended. I expected victory to feel hot. It felt quiet. I was relieved the law believed Mom and Derek's charm met a record he could not revise. But I grieved the brother from the bicycle memory. Accountability did not erase love. It removed love from the witness stand. Mom paid a price too. She lost the son she thought she knew and endured strangers examining her capacity. For months, she slept with the hallway light on and checked the lock 3 times. Revenge that ignores the victim's recovery is another performance, so punishment did not become the center of her life. Mom placed the house in a revocable trust, named a professional co-trustee, separated care expenses from gifts, and restored alerts to both of us. I visited every other weekend and called Wednesdays because distance had become Derek's tool once, and I would not lend it again. A counselor helped Mom describe what happened without apologizing. Forgiveness was not the first goal. One afternoon, about a year after the flood, the sheriff's office returned the green folder after the criminal case closed. The edges were torn, but Dad's original deed and handwritten notes were still inside. Mom ran her fingers over his writing and said, "I thought keeping the peace would keep the family." I answered, "It kept the secret." "That isn't the same thing." 18 months after I found Mom outside Pine Hollow, the motel was demolished. The town replaced it with a flood retention field, a wide-open space designed to hold dangerous water before it could reach people's homes. I understood the idea better than I wanted to. Pressure needs somewhere safe to go. If you trap it behind appearances, it eventually takes the structure with it. Mom still lives in her house. The cream robe Vanessa wore that morning went to a donation center. The old lock sits in a labeled evidence bag in Ruth's office, but the new key hangs beside Mom's kitchen door on a bright red cord. She does not hide it. She no longer asks permission to feel safe in property she owns. Our relationship changed too. I stopped calling only to ask whether bills were paid and started asking what she wanted her week to contain. Some Wednesdays she wanted to discuss the case. Others she wanted to tell me about a neighbor's tomatoes. Recovery was not one long conversation about betrayal. It was the return of ordinary choices. Mom learned that accepting help did not require surrendering authority, and I learned that being present was not the same as taking over. We built safeguards around her life without turning her life into a safeguard. Derek wrote twice from prison. The first letter blamed debt, panic, and Vanessa. I returned it unopened after reading the sender's name. The second contained one complete sentence of responsibility. I knew she had not agreed, and I did it anyway. Mom chose to keep that letter. She has not promised forgiveness or contact when he is released. Those decisions belong to her now. I had my own guilt to face. Derek exploited Mom, but I had trusted his convenient updates because they protected my schedule and my image of myself as the daughter who had escaped family chaos. I did not cause his crimes. Still, I ignored the signals that asked me to look closer. Admitting that difference, without turning my failure into an excuse for his, was the hardest honest thing I did. I used to think silence was neutral. It is not. Inside a family, silence can become shelter for the person doing harm and isolation for the person enduring it. Keeping abuse private does not preserve a family. Sometimes it only preserves the conditions that let abuse continue. The flood receded in 2 days. The financial case took months. Mom's trust will take longer. But the night I drove 180 miles taught me this. You do not have to destroy someone to stop them. You document. You draw the boundary, and you let consequences carry the weight they chose. So tell me honestly, if your own sibling left your parent outside in a flood, emptied their account, and then called it care, would you still try to settle it privately? Or would you hand every record to police, knowing it might send them to prison? I'll be reading your answers.
Thank you for being part of the fictional story with us. All events and situations are made only for entertainment, reflection, and education. We hope it reminds you that not every person who asks for another chance has earned one. A chance without accountability can become just another invitation for the same wound to be opened again.